Well, I hope everyone can hear me. See me? My name is Willie French, and I'm chair of Upstart Scotland. So, on behalf of all my colleagues on the Upstart board, I'd like to welcome you to this Upstart Hustings 2024 event. Just before we start, I'd like to offer on behalf of the board sincere thanks to all who are attending tonight's online event. Thank you very much. A very special thank you to our board member, Kate Johnson, an original and present board member, and thanking her for her tremendous time, effort, and organisation to convene tonight's event. Thanks also to those MSPs who have elected to participate in this evening's hustings. In a few moments, I'm going to hand over to Leslie Ridder for the remainder of the evening to lead and chair the Upstart hustings. And on behalf of the Upstart board, I'm offering our most
Right, is it just me or is
Willie, you're on silent.
Never mind. I think he was kind of almost there, weren't you, Willie?
Oh, right. Can I start again then?
No, we heard almost everything you said on behalf of blah, 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 blah. And then
Okay.
you're just cruising into
I'm just thanking you, Leslie, for chairing this evening's event. Leslie's one of Scotland's best-known commentators and broadcasters, and regularly heard on BBC Two, Channel 4, Radio 4, BBC Scotland. Leslie is co-founder and director of Nordic Horizons. So, Leslie, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to lead and chair tonight's Upstart hustings. Thank you.
Grant, well, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, I don't think I do very much on BBC Two ever now. You know, those were days in the past. But I actually the point about Nordic Horizons is pretty relevant because, I mean, although many people will know I have a political outlook that could colour this, I will put it in a box in the corner because the big reason that I'm interested in this question of kindergarten and early starts is that the 12 years I've spent really with Nordic Horizons and making films about the Nordic countries tells you a couple of things are utterly fundamental to their success in everything, boringly, tediously successful in everything they are. And one of them, unquestionably, is the normality of having this early kindergarten experience. In fact, it's us that are weird. I met and I was very impressed with Sue Palmer for such a long time. Some of the ways that she phrased things have really stuck in my mind. The 82% of the world's countries that send kids to school at 6 and 7, not 4 and 5. And the fact that it was our factory acts that basically needed to find a place to put children when women were being put into factories that has gravitated us towards 4 and 5. And really, there's just no academic evidence that supports that being a good idea for the kids. So that has stayed with me. And the evidence of all the Nordic countries is, you know, when the kids get a chance to just be kids until 6 or 7, motor functions together, all the rest, you know, they motor the second they finally get into school and begin to pick things up really well with all sorts of other benefits, particularly a sort of collegiate cooperative outlook. So that's what brings me into this anytime, all the time, because it's just fundamental, really. It just seems it gets lost out and missed out of so many debates. So that's, anyway, my way of sort of, you know, that's my prejudices right there on my sleeve. Let me introduce the candidates who've been kind enough to appear today. I don't think, despite what Willie said, that we actually have any MSPs in the ranks, although, dear knows, you know, everybody might have a wee crack at that too. But nonetheless, many of them don't want to do that because they want to be MPs. In fact, I think they all want to be MPs. So let me introduce them. First of all, we have Thomas Heald, who isn't visible here because I think he's got a bit of a shanky internet connection, and he is Conservative candidate for Dunfermline and Dollar, and I think also a councillor currently in Stirling. Is that right, Thomas, and can you hear us?
Yes, that's correct, Leslie. Thank you. Yes, correct.
Good, right. Okay, so that's Thomas, the voice, we will be calling him. Jill Riley is with us too. She's a Lib Dem candidate for Glenrothes and Mid-Fife, and she's also a spokesperson for the party, the Scottish Lib Dems, for social justice and care experienced young people. So Jill, will you give us a wave just so that we can establish who you are? That's fine. And just say, just can you just say hello? What's it been like for you out in the campaign trail today?
Hi Leslie, thanks for the intro. Yes, busy in Fife helping numerous different candidates and also within Glenrothes and Mid-Fife where I'm standing.
Right, good. That's Jill. Now, Annie, I hesitate about your pronunciation of your surname. McIndoe?
McIndoe.
McIndoe, see, whatever you go for. It's like Fife, you know, you can always spot a non-Fifer when they have to handle stuff like Ballingery. But anyway, Jill, Annie, say it again now after all that. I've forgotten.
McIndoe.
McIndoe. Right, you are. Where does that come from at all?
They're in the borders mostly.
The McIndoes.
Yes.
Right. Well, this McIndoe is SNP candidate for Central Ayrshire, which is sort of the seat vacated by Philippa Whitford. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
These are big shoes to fill in many respects.
They are indeed.
Yeah, so good luck. And Laura Moody for the Scottish Greens, who's the candidate for Dumfries and Galloway. Hello, Laura.
Hello.
And
Good to see everybody.
That's a massive old constituency. That must be is it the second biggest in Scotland?
I don't know if it's quite up there, but it's definitely, I think it's pretty much in the top 10, my guess.
I think, well, okay, I don't feel like it's tempting to get distracted into a discussion, but I'm sure that must be way up there. But anyway, so what part of the entire constituency are you in?
Almost in the middle. I'm in a place called Borg, which is just outside Kirkcudbright.
Right. Okay. Great. And we've got Ava Kestner with us as well, who's Scottish Labour candidate for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, a place I know pretty well, mother from Wick. Eva, hello.
Hello. Oh, sorry there. Hello.
Right. And are you up there at the moment or anywhere else?
No, I've just come down to visit my mother for a couple of nights in Edinburgh, so slightly better internet.
Yeah, yes. Okay, yes, that would probably be true. Right. Well, look, thank you all very much for joining us. I noticed from some of your CVs, some of you have got bairns. I mean, Laura, you went mad, didn't you, girl?
Got a bit carried away, really, with 4.
She's got 4. So, and other people haven't mentioned their sort of offspring count. So I thought we wouldn't quite go through it too much because, you know, if you want to raise it, raise it. If you don't, it's not relevant, perhaps. But anyway, let's horse on and see if we've got, I don't know if we've got in our midst, yes, there she is, a first question from Sue Palmer, who is the honorary president of Upstart Scotland. I saw you there for a second, Sue.
Returning, sorry.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah, sorry, my internet's playing up. I've only just managed to get on. I hope it's sort of stayed.
Yeah, keep talking, Sue. I've got your question, but you might want to ask it
I
yourself.
can't, I'm sorry, I haven't got it. I meant to print it out, but I got in such a state about the internet.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a longish question, so I've got some of it here. And it probably is quite a good one to kick off with for everybody. Sue wanted to point out that on the 19th of June, actually, Sue, you're can you just mute yourself a little bit? There's a little bit going, and I think it's coming from your end. On the 19th of June, a coalition of 200 children's charities, including Action for Children, Barnardo's, the Children's Society, a long list, wrote to all leaders of UK political parties asking them to put the needs of young children at the heart of policymaking in the future. This is Sue's question. There's endless research showing that attention to the needs of young children makes sound economic sense, resulting in massive savings in education, public health, criminal justice, and so on. And must surely matter to all politicians that the UK's children are as well cared for as possible. So, question, why in 2024 does that coalition have to write that letter? And what will your party do about it? So I think the kind of implication being that it's still something that seems to be big news and kind of keeps having to be reframed in every election campaign. So let's start first of all with Jill Riley.
So quite a big question. So I think from a Liberal Democrat perspective, we are very focused on the early years and children and childcare and championing and tackling issues that affect children. And we fully recognise that the early years are a critical stage for learning and life chances. So we have looked at policy areas affecting early years, and a lot of that is devolved. But in our manifesto for 2024, we have focused on some policy areas that require funding, and Scotland would receive decisions taken by Westminster Government. But overall, outside of that, the more cultural and structural changes that we think should be a focus for change within Scotland, such as play-based school until age 7, we wholeheartedly support. It's difficult for me to say why this is a problem and why we haven't managed to take this through. Certainly, it's something that we have taken to the Scottish Government back in 2021. Beatrice Wishart put forward a piece to discuss in Parliament, and it was discussed there. However, it wasn't taken forward. We also discussed it in 2022 when it was within our conference. However, that wasn't taken forward when we discussed it in Parliament. I do believe the SNP have also discussed that within their conference, and it was to be taken forward, but hasn't so far within Parliament. So certainly we definitely have lots of ideas and views onto how to improve this. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear what other parties have to say.
Sure. Jill, can I just see if I got you right there, that you're thinking it's play-based learning till 7?
That's certainly something that we proposed in our last Scottish manifesto.
Not 6, but 7.
7, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do in standalone kindergarten or within kind of schools? I mean,
Yeah, within we would obviously have to look into it, and I think we've proposed that we would have a pilot, but it would be within school, but with kindergarten style play until 7.
Okay, right. Thanks for that. Let's go now to, I've got all the names of Swan in front of me. Annie, because it would probably be kind of relevant since it was mentioned there, the SNP certainly did pass a motion calling on that childcare early years to go ahead. And then what's happened?
Indeed, it was passed at conference to go ahead. The focus of the SNP is on a wellbeing and economy. So that means that we will incorporate all decisions for the benefit of all, including the environment. As a result of that, we have put in place many policies to address the issues of austerity, which have had a huge impact on families and children during the past 14 years. We've brought in the Scottish Child Payment, and we continue to promote those policies that will help families deal with the current level of austerity. I am hoping that in the next round of policies that we do, in fact, push forward on the resolution that went to conference, as it has been agreed by all members. But the important thing is the Scottish Government recognise the effect of adverse childhood experiences, and some of the policies that we've brought in, which may not seem to benefit children and families, do in fact. The Scottish Violence Reduction Unit has moved on from its initial reducing violent crime to focusing on deprived areas. And what is happening is there is a holistic approach to benefiting families, so that involve police, health, social care, all working together, not in silos, but in environments where they can help people get the help that they need.
Annie, that's great. But just to kind of come back to the focus of this, the point of Upstart is to say that basically there needs to be a change in the school starting age. And the motion went through that it should be 6. And then what's happened? I mean, it looks like primary 1 and 2 is beginning to just morph into a bit of a kindergarten stage, but that's still not actually a ubiquitous 6 start.
No, it's not a ubiquitous 6 start at the moment. There is an early years programme in Scotland, and will move forward because, as we've said, it was passed by resolution at conference. It's taken longer because there is so much funding being spent on other areas that have been causing problems through the cost of living crisis. Funding, we have the highest number of teachers per head of population in Scotland. That will allow us to make more changes in how we educate young children. I'm all in favour of based learning and using our environment to teach children as well.
Right, Annie, you're slightly coming and going a wee bit, but that was fine.
Sorry.
Laura, can I just bring Laura in at this point? You were kind of, well, in fact, you weren't nodding, but you were looking, sort of watching like a hawk. So I'm assuming you've got something to say about this. Where are we with that? I mean, it's nice to think that if a conference passes something, it then automatically becomes policy, in which case I'm also waiting for the Scottish National Energy Company that, you know, never came out the other end. But to the point, you also, the Scottish Greens also passed a motion, didn't you? Looking for a starting age of 6. You were in government with a Butte House agreement until relatively recently. It didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely didn't. It was in our manifesto, and it's still something our MSPs would argue for in Parliament. Education didn't really feature as part of the Butte House agreement. It wasn't one of the areas where we felt there was enough overlap between the two parties for it to be something that we could agree on in government, because at the time there was still quite a big distance between our positions on education and the SNP's positions on education. We continue to lobby for it and advocate for it. A few years ago, Ross Greer, who's our spokesperson on education at Holyrood, commissioned some research on it, and essentially to sort of bolster the arguments and the evidence against the current status quo of what is a very early school starting age in the UK. It's interesting, the two benefits for that are always cited is child protection, but of course if children are in an extended kindergarten stage, they still are accessing protection if needed. And the second benefit that's cited is always a rather soulless one, that, well, children then come out of school a year earlier and can be useful, productive units in the economy, which isn't the sort of approach we would support. We want children to be happy and to be learning, and we want policy to be evidence-based, and there is really ample evidence that a later school starting age is the best approach. It's what works in Finland, which has the best education outcomes of any country in the world, and it's certainly what we think would work best in Scotland. Obviously, this is an election to Westminster, and the Greens support the devolution settlement, and there's not a great deal that, as a Westminster MP, I could do on particularly education, but there's lots we can do to tackle the underlying issues of the problems that those charities have raised, because most of them and most of the educational attainment gap comes down to poverty and failing to tackle poverty. So in terms of what we would do at Westminster level, we want to invest in public services. We believe that's the best way to grow the economy, and we do that through a wealth tax on the top 1%. We'd also make income tax more progressive, which we have done in government with the SNP, which would raise an extra 11 billion for public services. And also looking at sort of the day-to-day expenses that impact families. So things like abolishing standing charges for electricity customers, looking at capping the price of food essentials during inflation spikes, as they have done in France, and of course, abolishing the benefit cap. And one of the other policies that's in the Westminster Manifesto is to provide additional leave to fathers, as they do in Sweden, or obviously in the case of non-traditional families, the non-birthing partners, so that fathers are encouraged to play a greater role in childcare and take paternity leave. We currently have the most limited maternity leave in Europe, and we should change that to make it more generous.
Right. Well, what a groovy bunch of things, and yet it is just so disappointing that just the question of early years is something you could have agreed on. Your two conferences passed that almost identical motion within months of one another, but nobody ever thinks it's important enough to force that one through as the big policy.
We passed it as policy and it was in our manifesto, but I don't think it was in the SNP's manifesto. And that's the difficulty, that you are elected, your MSPs are elected on their manifesto. That's their mandate to deliver. And if parties have too much difference between them, it's very hard to make an agreement.
Right. Thomas Heald for the Conservatives. What's your view on this and on the question of, a later start, 6 or 7?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. But also, can I just apologise for the lack of video? I live in a rural area, and sometimes when it rains or it's windy, it can be quite precarious, which is most of the time. So apologies for that. As a father of 2 young daughters myself, I know the challenges faced in the early years and also accessing early years provision. I have discussions almost on a daily basis with my wife about how we can best support my daughters, give them access to good early years education. I also understand the benefits of play-based learning, and I hear all the stories that my daughters have about mixing with people from all sorts of backgrounds and abilities at their nursery. All too often, we think about education being focused on the later years, but good quality early years education is essential for the formative years of a child's life. We too often think about the pyramid of education as the wrong way around. The truth is that we need to get early years right. If we do this, the rest will follow. I think it was UNICEF who were very clear about it. The first 5 years of a child's life are fundamentally important. And we too often, as politicians, get bogged down in league tables, which are obviously important, but that's what politicians do. But actually, happiness is a big part of that too. When we think about it in terms of the play-based learning concept, it's not particularly surprising. I mean, we get a new phone, we sit and play with it for a bit as adults. We don't necessarily read the manual. It's just human nature. In terms of our manifesto, we've committed to looking at a model of kindergarten. Now, we're not sure what model is best. I think there was a members' debate in the Scottish Parliament a couple of weeks ago on this, and actually there was broad agreement in the parties that this is something we should look at. In terms of what model that would be, we're open to discussions.
Right. But I mean, well, perhaps Sue has got more thoughts on this, what the various models are, but I'm very conscious we haven't heard from Eva yet. But I mean, you've no preferences then what would the models be? Standalone kindergarten or turning primary 1 and 2 into kindergarten? I mean, how many different models have you got?
I mean, there are quite a few. I think Finland has one, but there's also Singapore, there's also Switzerland. So in terms of how that would be restructured, we are open to seeing the evidence and seeing the discussions.
Everybody's got one. I mean, if you want to go through models, just look at, I think, bizarrely, the Netherlands and every British colony and us, and then take the rest of the world. They've all got kids starting at 6 and 7. I think you're just sort of dancing in the head of a pin a wee bit here. I mean, well, anyway.
Yeah, to be honest, Leslie, we're honest with you, we're actually very new to this. There's been a lot of internal debate within our own party. So we've committed to this and we're now open to discussions.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good.
Which is a step forward. Yeah.
Right. Eva, Labour, Scottish Labour, where are they with this?
Well, I would kind of start with both Scottish Labour and the National Party in terms of a manifesto have really made a commitment around early years education, but not just around the kindergarten, but just sort of the wider point about good quality childcare and how important it is. And I think that point about actually, if you look at all the evidence, the amounts of support you give, the younger you give, the better outcomes it has throughout the system. And I think that's really, really key to it. So it's something that we have, put quite front and center that we want to invest in. But it's not as simple as just saying this is a policy. It's also putting the investment in the workforce, which is really important. Because if we don't have the places, the workforce and the structure to actually deliver it, then it's not going to have the beneficial effect. So I think that's the really key part of it, is making sure that just across the board, that early years part of it is really well funded and looked after and taken really seriously. Like on a personal, I've worked in the violence against women sector for a really, really long time that specifically was looking around the effects on children. And one of the things there is that, again, if you have a really good system that provides early years education, but also supports families within that, you think about the original kind of shore style hubs, you actually people talk about it protection, but you actually create a more holistic environment that gives kids the actual opportunities that once they get into school. So yeah, absolutely around the child-based learning about what that curriculum would look like, but also it gives them the support and the foundations to actually achieve going forward as well.
But just to be accurate then, has Scottish Labour got a position on childcare and early years in its manifesto?
So yes, so I mean, obviously it's devolved. So in terms of what would happen in Scotland, what we're saying is we're absolutely committed to the extension of it, but it is around getting the provision in place as well that's really key.
Okay.
So there are commitments around that.
And actually, forgive me, I should have put that the other way. A school starting age of 6 or 7.
So there isn't a specific commitment around that, but again, there's the big commitment about looking at the whole education system, like to look at what would be the best models to actually achieve that attainment. And I think that it, you know, as you said, that there's quite broad agreement that it's really worth looking at. And I think that from our point of view, it is also, it's not a single policy. It has to go around everything else as well.
Okay, Sue, I think that's everyone. Forgive me if I've forgotten anybody. I don't think so. Sue, so what do you make of what you've heard there? We can't hear you, lass. Sue, you haven't unmuted.
I'm sorry, it's still just the same as if nothing's happening. Basically, everybody thinks it's a good thing for children to have at least until 6 a play-based approach to learning, and that is actually enshrined in Curriculum for Excellence. But because we have a school starting age of 4 or 5, once children go into school, they become part of the education system as opposed to early learning and childcare. So they just get treated like part of the education system, and all the local authorities are trying to track their literacy and numeracy progress from the minute they come into school. So the schools feel obliged to teach in a much more formal way than you would if you were trying to do it through a developmentally appropriate system. So it's just, everything just carries on being the same and will carry on. That's why we are campaigning for a change in the school starting age, because until you actually change that by law, you don't change the way people work. And at the moment, early years and early learning and childcare advise until children go to school. After they go to school, it's the education department who basically, from what I can make out, know absolutely nothing about early child development. They know about school and literacy and numeracy and testing and that sort of thing. So you need a change to make people recognize that we're not doing the best for our children. But can I just say one other thing? It's the short-termism in the end. All the things we can do for little kids, they won't pay off until, what, 15 years in the future? And there's your political problem, because everything's got to be something that shows within 5 years. So little children in this country are always going to get forgotten because we just don't really care about them very much.
Right, a plague on all your houses there, you folk. Does anyone want to come back on that after you got whacked out of the heat by Sue? Yeah, Eva.
I mean, I think you're entirely right in terms of the political problem, that it is a really long-term thing, and it's the wider thing. I mean, I think what I would say about both Scottish Labour and the Labour Party is actually we've always been committed to this area. We just haven't, we've been out of power for such a long time at this point. But you think about the investment that we put into Sure Start and things like that. We actually do take this area really, really seriously and actually have made commitments around it. So I really understand the frustration here, because it does feel like you're forgotten. But as you say, if we don't get it right, it just flows through the rest of the system for decades to come.
So do you feel you can speak like an exchange,
I did actually speak to Scottish Labour way back when you were in power, and I mentioned this and said I thought it was very important, and they didn't ask me back.
Right, Annie?
I do believe that the Scottish Government and the SNP are committed to small children, but we are trying to deal with poverty and deprivation, because we absolutely believe that adverse childhood experiences affect children's ability to learn, affect them when they're older and in later life and the decisions that they make. So it has to be a layered approach. But we absolutely recognise that every child should have the ability to reach their full potential, no matter their start in life. And that's the approach that the Scottish Government and the SNP are taking. They are trying to make sure that all children have access to potential. But I do believe that the early learning through play is critical. And I will be pushing it in Westminster as well.
Right. Okay. Laura wants to come in. I'm very conscious that Thomas can't communicate very easily. Can you do that wee thing where you put your hand up when you're not in vision, I wonder? Anyway, I'll come to you at some point, Thomas. Yeah. Laura, meantime.
Yeah, I'm just going to add in that I think we do need to put our money where the mouth is on this one, because it's easy to say, oh, just change the law and then it will change. But I think to do this properly would mean quite a lot of investment in changing the school and nursery estates. And I'm also a bit concerned that I don't want to end up in a situation where we repeat what happened with 1140 hours of childcare, where there was a real struggle to get the right childcare in the right place. And certainly I found, living in a rural area, that didn't entirely succeed because there just weren't enough providers. There was an attempt to rely on the private sector, but that didn't really work because childminders, there weren't even enough of those in rural areas. So, you know, that's why I sort of panned back to the big picture, because ultimately we need to invest money in this to do it properly, and make sure that nobody gets left behind, that we don't end up with a postcode lottery on this one, where there's a provision in law, but it doesn't actually get delivered on the ground.
Okay, I'm just trying to feed in. I should have said you can put comments in the chat, which I notice, I guess everyone else does as well. Kathy from the Children's Parliament is saying, I agree the benefits of kindergarten are lifelong, but we don't need to wait 15 years for the payoff. When children's needs are met with kindness, love and understanding, it helps with everything from emotional self-regulation, confidence building, developing agency. This is, I'm going to say, I just did a film about Denmark that's been doing the rounds around Scotland and has now had almost 500,000 views online, which is kind of weird. I mean, a big building block of that is just showing how the kids are behaving in kindergarten, not school, to the age of 6, that being absolutely normal. And nobody, I mean, people just think you're weird. If you said you're sending children to school at 4 in these countries, they would think you were mad. And honestly, none of you, I'm afraid, are talking about doing that thing, getting 6 and 7 in there. Thomas might be coughing politely in the background, are you?
I wasn't actually, no, but I made a comment if that's okay. I actually want to agree with something that Laura said. I didn't imagine coming onto this chat and agreeing with the Scottish Green Party, but actually doing this properly would involve a lot of changes to the school estate. It needs a lot of investment. But I also want to give a little bit of reassurance. I was looking back at the 2021 debate that Upstart Scotland had, and to get from that point there, where there was very little agreement about this, to the point we're at now, where actually, you know, our political parties at Holyrood are sitting around the table and discussing this as a real prospect. So I think I understand the frustration, but there is real progress here. I'm actually quite encouraged by it.
Right. Jill, do you want to have a comment now?
So I think, you know, from our position, you know, we're clear that we are very supportive of this and we think that it should be a priority. And I think, you know, as it says in the chat, I think having children having longer time to actually develop before they start formal education will improve the attainment gap that we see. In turn, that will improve poverty in the longer term, and it will mean that everyone has, you know, the opportunity to flourish. And the Lib Dems are very supportive of this and would work with Upstart on that. I know Willie Rennie has been quite involved in this. So yeah, I think we're very supportive, and obviously I've taken this to Parliament back in 2021.
Right. I've suddenly realised that we've got half an hour left in this. We've had one question so far. Apologies, what a rubbish chair I am. So let me just try and get a couple of questions going, and then you could choose, you know, which of those you want to answer, because otherwise it does take a wee while going round everybody. But I suppose that's the big, you know, issue that we've already discussed. Right. I wonder if we have Tam Bailey with us. Do we have Tam? Oh yeah, there you are, Tam. Do you have? Well, have you got your question, or will I ask for you?
Yeah, I've just put a couple of comments through. Thanks for introducing me, Linda, Leslie, and share your passion for us having a kindergarten state. So I declare my own prejudices on that. I put a couple of comments through the chat there because whilst SNP passed a motion at conference, the government have been resolute in not wanting to implement it on the basis that it wasn't in their manifesto. That's been really disappointing. And the second thing is Scottish Labour, despite numerous approaches, have not agreed to meet with us in any shape or form, and that's really disappointing. Scottish Labour are proven very difficult to engage with. So it's great that you're here tonight, Eva. Thanks for your input. I don't know. Do you want me to ask a question then, Leslie? Is that what you want?
Honestly, ask what you want. One was sent through, but if things have moved on, there's something else you want to ask, just go for it. The mic is open.
Okay, I'll actually stick with one of the questions that I've asked, because the evidence isn't just about raising the school starting age. It's also about how we support our youngest children from birth through to 2 years, and we've now got lots of evidence about the impact that will have. So I'm interested in what it is that each of the parties are going to do to improve our national strategic approach for pre-birth to 2 years, because it isn't there just now, despite the amount of money that we've already allocated to early years. It gets allocated mainly through the preschool provision and not to pre-birth and families who are raising up to 2 years old. And that's what the evidence is about maximum impact. So I'm interested in what the parties are going to do about that. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thanks, Tam. Let me take another one now. I've sort of scribbled that down. So if everyone's going, God, I'm not going to remember all these, I hope I will. Kate Johnson. Kate, do you want to hop on and ask your question?
Yeah, 2 seconds. Yes, I'm interested in how, if you are elected as MPs, how your parties at Westminster will ensure that the UNCRC incorporation into Scottish law will be upheld by Westminster and they won't impede it. That's what I'm interested in. Thank you very much.
Yeah, actually, those are probably, that's two very specific questions. Actually, Hell's Teeth, let's just take one more and then people can choose the thing that they want to answer so that we get a variety. Kathy, are you still with us, Kathy McCulloch? There she is.
Yeah, I'm still here. Actually, my question was similar to Kate's, Leslie. It was about how the UNCRC seems to me to be one of the biggest levers we've ever had to make sure that children's rights are upheld in terms of children's best interest. And it is clearly in children's best interest to attempt to not be put into formal education at 4 and 5. So how you use the UNCRC to make sure that children have the rights that they're entitled to.
Actually, Kathy, can I ask you something? I mean, the question you had was sort of saying that many people in Scotland have a fairly ambivalent feeling about children's rights, or even pretty anti. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What's that coming from?
I think, yeah, we just come across this all the time. People worry that children's rights in Scotland often means for people that children get their own way. I had a university lecturer not long ago who came at the beginning of a meeting and he said to me, wait to hear this. My 6-year-old P2 came home yesterday from school and I said to him, you need to tidy your bedroom before tea. And he said, I don't need to tidy my bedroom. My teacher I don't need to do what you say. My teacher says I've got rights. And he said, what do you think of that then? And I just looked at him and said, really? And he said, I need to think about this a bit more, don't I? And I think the first point that people get to in this is that children's rights, that's all we need. Children have got far too many rights, or it means that I'm going to lose power as an adult, and children are going to be ruling the roost and have Mars for breakfast. So how do we get people to understand that this is really only about keeping children healthy, happy and safe? Really amazingly significant. What an opportunity we've got.
Yeah, and Kathy, since you're still there, just in case everybody hasn't run through this already, you know, you could let us know if it isn't about the right to be able to say stuff you about kind of tidying your room. What is the incorporation going to do for children's rights? What kind of things? Could you just name 3 in Scotland?
The right to be listened to, so the right to for children to have a say about what works for them and what doesn't. The right to play, to have opportunities to play outside. The right to live with your family, and for for your family, for your parents to guide children. And you've got Tam Daly, who's the ex-commissioner for children, the children's commissioner, and you know, these are just really fundamental, basic rights. It's not about children saying, I'm not going to do my homework, I'm only going to eat chocolate except on Sundays from now on. We still as adults have a responsibility to keep children healthy, happy, safe. So it's about recognising children as independent agents in the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Look, thanks for that. Right, so there's 3 questions. I know you'll end up feeling tempted to answer a bit of all 3 of them, but you could just resist that and go for one in a wholehearted way, you 5. There's Tam's question about really the gap being the pre-birth to 2 years old. There's a kind of gap in the strategy there. What would your party do about that? There's Kathy, backed up, well, in fact, Kate's backed up by Kathy, who wants to know about the UNCRC's incorporation into Scots law and how we could be sure that that will happen and not get blocked somewhere else, like Westminster. And Kathy also wanted to know, just amplifying that point about children's rights, do you get it? So choose what you want to answer and fire away, Jill.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with Tam. And I know your question was around what is in our manifesto regarding children younger than 2. So for our manifesto for 2024, I suppose we are looking to make sure that we can support parents, but also support providers of childcare as well. So firstly, supporting parents with childcare provision. So we want to expand it to make the very most of the very early years. And it was actually the Lib Dems who convinced the Scottish Government to expand free childcare. You know, we argued relentlessly that this is one of the most effective ways to close the attainment gap for children, along with raising the starting school age. So yeah, in our manifesto, we are looking to double statutory maternity and shared parental pay to increase the options and flexibility in the early months. And we'd also look to add in some additional leave entitlement for fathers and partners. We'd increase the take-up of funded 2-year-old places where eligible and extend the entitlement so that even more could benefit from that. And that would also include extending that to 1-year-olds that would be eligible. And we'd ensure that all families have holiday options and wraparound provision as well, which is maybe a little bit for the older children. So we'd also look to support preschool providers and giving options that meet the needs of families and communities. So it was noted in an Audit Scotland report last year that there are risks to the sector, that these could really affect the flexibility and the choice for families, like budget pressures, workforce recruitment challenges, and the ability of funded providers to stay in business. So in response to this, in our manifesto, we would introduce fairer rates for the private, voluntary and independent providers. So they would actually cover the cost of delivering the high quality care, which it doesn't currently. We'd also look to improve career progression and give greater certainty to the workforce by giving longer term assurances to providers to allow them to really grow their business. And refocus the importance of childminding as part of the system of childcare, which has dropped away in recent years, but should be part of that overall system. So they're the key areas within our manifesto, I think, should answer Tam's question.
Right, stop.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I'm just conscious. We will totally run out of time, Jill.
Okay, sorry.
And make everyone just pick one thing. Can I have one other person who wants to answer Tam's question? Because then I'm going to ask Tam to come back briefly and see what he makes of the answer. Does anyone else want to choose Tam's question?
Yes, I can if you want.
Thomas, go for it.
Actually, I think it can be broken down. So Tam talked about pre-birth care. Now, during COVID, for example, we saw a massive drop-off in the number of classes for expectant mothers. I know my own wife, without her children, had no access to those services. Now, she was in a lucky position that she is from a very supportive family who helped her with that. But I'm aware that quite a lot of people, particularly in deprived areas, didn't have that access to that. And actually, it's not picked up in the way that we would like. In terms of how we go forward, in our manifesto, we've committed to enabling working parents to access 30 hours of free childcare a week from 9 months on. I think this is quite important because I know from my own experience that going back to work, particularly still in the modern world, actually particularly it falls on the females to go back to work. A lot of people go back to work and all the money they earn just goes on childcare. And that is a big problem in terms of actually breaking down child poverty. Because one of the big barriers to parental employment actually is access to affordable childcare. So that's in our manifesto. Yeah, I'll leave it there just for time, actually.
Yeah, thanks for that, Thomas. Right, Tam, can you just come back on your question? What did you make of those two answers?
Yeah, thanks very much for the answers. I mean, it's easy enough to give a list of things that you would do in terms of our youngest children. But what I'm really looking for is a much more strategic approach that actually puts our children in the earliest years right at the centre of increased developments. And what I mean by that is that if you even look at where we're at with health visitors, for instance, we still don't have anything like the kind of individualised support that's to all families and building in an expectation that they get assistance in those early years. You can look at also the amount of people, it's just been mentioned about the amount of childcare that's actually paid for, although I'm not advocating that we have we have to be very careful about the kind of childcare that we provide for children in years 1 and 2. And I think we really need to have the same energy that we've spent developing what we call early years in childcare towards pre-birth and children up to the age of 2. It takes much more than just a list of things where we're going to be, in trying to ease the pressure in family. I think actually we have to try and change our mindset that this is the time where we need to be getting in and around supporting all of our families, but in particular the most vulnerable. And I can say just now, I'm coming from a world of child protection. Most of the children that come into our child protection, they're under the age of 5. This is our most vulnerable age group, and we have to actually be paying much more attention to it than we are right now. Sorry, I could go on. Do you want me to go on? Sorry, Leslie, you're on mute.
Leslie.
Yep, sorry, muted myself because I was having a wee cough. Thanks for that, Tam, and Fiona is saying well said, Tam, on the chat. Honestly, we could be here for hours, given even the amount of chat questions that are coming up are just phenomenally large. But we haven't got that time. So let me focus on the questions that remain, which are really the thing about the UNCRC being incorporated into Scots law. So Laura, have you got a view on that?
Yes. So that is actually going to happen on the 16th of July 2024, so in a couple of weeks, albeit it will be slightly watered down because the Scottish Government passed legislation for the UNCRC to be completely incorporated into Scots law, only for the Westminster Government to say you can't do that. So they had to then modify it and take out some of the provisions that the Westminster Government were unhappy with. It's good that it's coming in some form. It's hugely disappointing that, yet again, despite there being a huge consensus in Scotland for this to happen, that change passed with a lot of support. We were thwarted in doing so by Westminster. So as an MP, the Scottish Government's obviously support an independent Scotland within the EU. It would come as no surprise that we would want to make it much harder for Westminster to ever be in a position to make those kind of changes again. We'd want to remove Section 35, which essentially gives a veto to the Secretary of State over any legislation in Hollywood. They do not have to give sound reasons for that. They can just go ahead and do it. And the repeal of the Internal Market Act, which was opposed by all of the devolved governments for the very obvious reason that it was going to undermine their decisions about their regulatory frameworks and how they operate. So all nations within the union must be able to have equal say in how things are decided, where
Okay.
there's challenge.
Thank you, Laura. Eva, since Labour look like they're going to do pretty well, let's say, how would this is a kind of source of aggravation that the last Westminster government has vetoed aspects of what seems to be pretty innocent legislation. Would that be happening again with a Starmer-led government?
No, I mean, I can give a really simple answer to that one, which is that we absolutely kind of believe in the reaffirmative commitment and recognising the UHRC both for the Scottish Parliament, but also at a wider UK level as well. We absolutely believe in renewing all of those kind of international declarations and things like that, and actually changing that dynamic as well, that very confrontational dynamic that's happened over the last few years. So, very simply, no, we want to be able to do that. I just also wanted to pick up on Pam's put just about the really early year start, and I think that it's really important to look at that stage of pre-care, especially around child protection, that goes further, is also about protecting women as well. Again, an area I know a lot about is violence against women, and again, the area of birth and childbirth is a massive point of escalation. And actually, if we can put in the provision and support around that, you can actually help prevent further harm going forward. And you have to do that around kind of looking at really holistically and really taking on what Tam said about it has to be a holistic approach to be able to achieve that. And it's again something that both the Scottish Labour Party and the wider Labour Party are really committed in investing in that support. So looking at the workforce, looking at the training, looking at all of that. So it's not ad hoc, it is that holistic approach, which is really important.
Okay, and Annie, thoughts on the question about the incorporation to Scots law?
Yes, I mean, we'll be pushing for incorporation in Westminster. Already, it's going to be approved on 16th of July, and Scotland has already stated its position. But as has been pointed out, we need to ensure that Westminster do stop our bills where there's no need for it. It's just a exercise of their power. And I will be fully supporting that in Westminster. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points. We may not have enough health visitors at the moment, but we do have a lot of health visitors, and health visitor visits have resulted in Scotland that less and less children are visiting A&Es because of the relationships that the health visitors are building with the mums. And additionally, the Scottish Government's working with the Royal College of Nursing to improve midwifery and training. We give Best Start food grants and Best Start grants to pregnant women because we recognise that it's not just the health of that baby in the womb, it's the health of the grandchild as well that's affected by poor diet. So there's a lot of things going on. I take the point that children are at their most vulnerable until the age of 5. The Scottish Government, by bringing in kinship carers payments, has meant that some children who cannot stay with their own parents are still kept within the family unit. I think that's to be celebrated. It allows them to continue with those relationships that are important to them going forward.
Right, thank you. Kathy, well, there was both Kathy and the original question was actually asked by Kate, but I can see Kathy. Do you have a response to what you've just heard?
Yeah, it's just really disappointing to hear people start banging on about Westminster and what Westminster's doing. We've got this amazing piece of legislation now. It's an act that's coming in on full force on the 16th of July, and we should be celebrating that, I'd like to see your politicians say, absolutely, we should be the morally right anyway, and we're going to be doing all we can to make sure that we work out how to embed and implement UNCRC across Scotland, not within Westminster's gift to challenge that because it's now enacted in Scots law.
Right. So, but the thing is, Kathy, then it's a done deal.
It's done deal, it's an act, yeah, but by the answers that we've heard tonight, I'm not sure that anybody's really got their head around what it is, what it means, and how you would go about making sure that people understand what it is, know about it, understand what it is, and how do you do it? How do you actually realise children's rights?
Although, to be fair, although I did try to tease a couple of points out of you, you know, that wasn't the question that was asked. But nonetheless, Laura's wanting to come back with a wee thing.
Yeah, I would say partly, you know, because this has been a long time coming, that a lot of schools have already kind of got ahead of the game on this. I'm a parent chair at my children's school, and a lot of schools around us are working on the UNCRC Rights Respecting Schools Awards, and they're fantastic. As a parent chair, when my child's school was going for the Silver Award, we had basically a half day in school being quizzed by a panel about what all teachers understood about rights, what the pupils understood about rights, and what the parents and the parent council understood about rights. So I would say it's not fully in legislation yet, it's coming. It might not be as comprehensive as we'd have liked because of the issues with Westminster, but that doesn't mean stuff's not happening. And I think it's to the credit of the schools and a lot of the leadership in the schools that they are going ahead and making sure that this is embedded in the way that they're teaching, which some schools are, and I think it's to be commended.
Right. We've got another question coming from Diane Delaney, if she's with us. Diane?
Diane can't be here, but it'd be great if you could ask it.
Right. So Diane's question is, how does your party plan to balance the rights of parents and children in the context of mental health support? What policies will you implement to ensure both groups receive the support and protection that aligns with their rights? There was a couple of other questions that had come in that were also touching on mental health, but just while can't quite speak and scan at the same time. So I think that's the only one I've got that's different actually from the ones that have already been asked. Maybe I'm missing something. So I'm going to ask the silent majority who are in the audience here. Does anyone want to ask a question? Can anybody put their hands up when they're on? If you want to ask a question, and don't be coy. I mean, what are you in this for if you're just going to sit there and not ask anything? Can you just kind of come into video vision and let that, then I can see you jump in? Come on, it's not that scary. Come on, folks. We're not going to go on till we've got another 2 people. It's going to be boring. Right, the problem is I can't see everybody. Right, is nobody actually, I may be maligning you, but I can't see anybody's coming into vision to ask a question. I mean, you've actually had good questions in the chat. Come on, everybody. If you'd had a kindergarten stage, you'd be bold enough now to ask your blooming questions. Ah, Sophie. Right. Sophie, unmute yourself and fire away.
There's a slight hitching. I've got laryngitis. But anyway, so what I would like to know is, and it's all to do with the early years as well and throughout education, is why is it the politicians completely ignore the decades and decades of research about music and the arts and the benefits to every single aspect of a person's development when they have access to learning a musical instrument? There are reams and reams and reams of research papers that prove this, and no politician actually takes this on board. Can you tell me why that is, and why there is a blanket, sort of a blindfolding around the arts amongst politicians?
Okay. Right, got it there, Sophie. Right, we've got one more person that wants to pop up and ask a question.
Did I come in, Leslie? It's Tam again.
Yep.
Okay, it follows on from Kathy's thing about the thing about UNCRC and the opportunity we've got. I think it'd be interesting to know what the parties do to ensure that their policies are grounded on the views and experiences of children and young people. That's one of the fundamentals of UNCRC about children's right to have an opinion and to express that opinion and for people to take account of it. So I'd be interested to know, what is it the parties do to ensure that they take on board the views of children and young people?
And can I just ask you then something, Tam? Given that I get the acronym wrong, but the children's rights are going to be incorporated on, was it July the 14th or 16th? I can't remember the date, but soon. Does that mean that the ability to have an input to policy will be legally required?
Yeah, we're already under obligations by signing the UNCRC. What the legislation does is it gives rights of complaint and it endorses all of the rights that are in UNCRC. But we've been in breach of children's rights for years.
Yes, I see that that's been there in the chat. So that's why I'm asking. I mean, for example, we're sitting with a situation where one dogged woman managed to get to a stage in Surrey where she might have changed the whole future of oil and gas extraction in the UK because of a Supreme Court judgment. So that, you know, and many things actually, which don't seem to politically move very far, suddenly move quite very far when there's a legal underpinning to them. So could a bairn or a bairn's parents be using this to be able to enforce
Yes,
input?
the answer is yes. And I can tell you now that local authorities are sitting in trepidation, just waiting for the first court case to come forward. It might be in the area of additional support for learning, for instance, with children who've got disabilities and are not being properly catered for. So there'd be very strong, rich area for an appeal. For it to be taken through the complaints process that's been set up as a result of the Act. So the answer is yes. Watch this space. Kathy's right. There would be numerous examples that go through the courts much easier now than it would be when we've just signed it as a convention. Now it's in legislation.
Yes, right, got it. Okay, and Juliet has popped in for Juliet Robertson. So ask your thing, Juliet, and then this will be the last question, and we'll fling it over to the five.
Okay, this is to all five, and I want to know, how can we trust you about delivering on a kindergarten stage when children have no voice, when always they are not made to feel valued, and it feels a bit like everything to do with climate change. You've got two really compelling, urgent situations. And because it's a long-term thing and not a short-term thing, how can we trust you to deliver on the Upstart, on the kindergarten stage? Right.
Although it strikes me that what we've just heard there about some of the rights that children are about to have, perhaps trust isn't going to be as much as levering kind of court cases, who knows. Right, let's start with Thomas on these questions. I'm sorry if there's now quite a few, but there was the one about mental health for parents and children from Diane. There was the one from Sophie about why does everyone ignore the evidence about music and arts within early years education. There was the question about the children's input to policy, basically, that's forthcoming imminently now because of the passage of that act. And Juliet asking about how can we trust you guys when children basically don't have a voice. Now that's a whole lot of different stuff. So just pick one or potentially two, but that's the most.
Thanks, Leslie. I'll do my best to be succinct. Firstly, touching on mental health, I could sit here for hours and talk about this, but actually the modern world is a very different world to even when I went to school. So children going to school now, whatever happens in school stays with them through social media, and we see that with the big problem with bullying and violence in schools right now. In terms of the balance between parents and children, that's absolutely right. I mean, children are under pressure now from the age of 2 or 3 to conform with societal norms. We've also got a huge problem with CAMHS in this country in general. Not just the waiting times, which are appalling, but actually the number of referrals that are rejected by CAMHS services, leaving a lot of children to rely on mental health charities who are fantastic, but actually shouldn't have that additional burden. In terms of what we would do, the Scottish Conservatives would invest £8 million in additional training for school staff. and holistic support from these specialist mental health charities, because a lot of this mental health crisis that we're facing is a result of what's happening in the classroom, and actually what didn't happen in the classroom during COVID as well. These children actually have been let down over the last 4 or 5 years. I'll touch briefly on music and the arts as well, because as you referred to, I'm a local councillor as well. Unfortunately, the budget situation that local councils are in right now across Scotland, there's some really tough choices. I know in our particular boat, we made the decision to protect music tuition in a certain council area, because actually that is actually really important. And when I was at school, I did piano lessons, and actually it was really, really beneficial to me, and I still play piano to this day. So it actually wraps into what I was talking about extracurricular activities as well, and wraparound childcare. A lot of the arts and music could be done after the regular school day, and actually that would feed into providing parents with wraparound childcare that they need. I think I'll leave it at that for time.
Right. Thanks, Robert. Ava, do you want to pick any of the above? And please don't ask me to repeat them.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. I'll make a kind of more general point about why this is often forgotten, and it is about investment in a holistic approach and a strategic approach. And I think it really goes back to actually the point about trust. And it's very easy to make lots and lots of promises that you then either don't deliver, or you don't deliver in a kind of holistic way. And it's one of the things that as a party at the moment, we're really, really trying to make sure that we're not doing, and being very honest and transparent, that actually at the moment in loads of areas, and this area being a prime example of that actually most of our public services are in massive decline, and actually getting the basics right needs to happen first. And that has to be through investment and a long-term strategy to get that sorted. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think that's...
Wait, sorry to interrupt, but just in the Scottish context, which is the country we're sitting in, you know, the UNCRC is about to be incorporated. So it is going to be possible for a child or parents or somebody to legally enforce the rights that are contained within it, whether there's a budgetary crisis or not, actually. So the question there is, how are children, it was Tam who asked it, how are children inputting to your party's policy? Because if they're
Well, I mean,
not,
I think
they're in trouble.
I mean, I think it's through mechanisms that you have things like the Children's Parliament and wider mechanisms like that. You consult, you have those conversations with both parents and children as much as you can. So you kind of drive that forward, and that's something again that we're making commitments of trying to renew those public services in a holistic way. We are going to have to listen to everyone. We want to do this in partnership with people. We're not trying to do this in a confrontational way. We're actually trying to bring people with us. And that's how you do it. And it will take a while to go through the system, but actually starting from a place that says, actually, we want to be honest with people. This is going to take a while, and we actually want to sit down and listen to you about what are the different ways we can do it, I think is a lot more trustworthy than putting in manifestos or in other things a bunch of things that you might not ever actually be able to deliver on the ground.
Okay. Actually, Tam or Kathy, can you come back in? Because am I right in thinking that it may not feel fair to politicians, or indeed to local councillors or anybody, that they now have a kind of aspect of compunction on them now to take, you know, children's rights seriously? But that's the case, isn't it? That, you know, in Scotland it's going to be different from the UK, because now these kids have got leverage.
By signing the UNCRC in 1991, we committed to upholding it. Now we've got legislation that can allow children the vehicle to actually make sure that that happens. And one of the mantras that I carry around with me is that it's okay to be unreasonable for our children, because they always come at the tail end of funding and policy considerations. So we're just tipping the balance more in favour of children than ever it's been. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Annie.
The Scottish Government have been involved in listening to children for policy development. They've covered lots of different areas and had input from children. That's not to say they don't have a lot more to do and they don't have to incorporate it into every function. However, young carers forums have been created. Children have been asked for input into domestic violence, know about domestic violence, about the police. So there have been a lot of projects where children have been asked to contribute directly. However, obviously, having signed the UCHR, then the Scottish Government will continue to develop children's input to policies.
Right, Jill. There's other questions in there, the ones about music and arts and trust and so on. But what do you want to answer?
So I think, you know, one of the things that we have put in our manifesto is around setting up an independent advocacy body for children's safety online specifically. So that's one of the examples of where we would look to involve children and support children in making sure that their rights are supported. And I think to the point on music and including the arts, that's certainly a forefront within our current manifesto as well. So we want to make sure that there's an increase in these extracurricular activities such as drama, the arts, music. It is very important for part of children's development to make sure that this is a priority, and it probably has been deprioritised in recent years, and we want to see that change and turn around. So yeah, very supportive of what Sophie was saying.
Whoops, Laura.
Yeah, I'm going to take the pick and mix approach. I share Tam's view that I think there's quite a lot of legal cases waiting, particularly in regards to additional support needs, because that's an area that has been really underfunded and is really struggling at the moment. So I strongly suspect we are going to see a lot of legal cases coming through once UNCRC is fully incorporated in Scots law. On children's involvement in policy making, in the Greens, all our policy is made by members, and you can join the Greens from the age of 12. So we do actually have children actively involved in policy making. But I was also the Green representative on the Scotland's Climate Assembly, and they had a really great approach to engaging with children and getting their views on the recommendations that came through that. And I'd love to see that copied through on all aspects of legislation, because it was a really interesting, they kind of did a parallel process that fed in throughout, which was really useful. On culture, completely agree. I'm really passionate about culture and especially instrumental tradition in schools, but also drama and music in general. I think one of the issues with that is culture is undervalued generally in Scotland. Bizarrely, given how huge it is to our economy, it's such a growing sector. It's crucial, especially to diversified rural economies. And so it's bizarre to me that it quite often is first on the chopping block when it comes to cuts. I'm fortunate in my local authority, we still have universal free music tuition, and it's fantastic. And it clearly, evidence shows it leads to better outcomes elsewhere. And on mental health, again, with so much health, there's been so many cuts, so much austerity, that now we're left with bare bones services that leap in when things go wrong, rather than providing the ongoing support that we actually need to prevent poor mental health outcomes. So we need to invest and make sure there's a triage system, there's a mental health support worker in every school, because I still don't think we've really recovered from the mental health impacts of the COVID pandemic. So I think we really need to have that baseline ongoing mental health support in all our communities.
Right. I'm kind of conscious we've overshot the end time, that we started a wee bit late. Somebody. Right. Maybe. That's really strange. Are you back?
No, it's Willie. Willie is with his wife.
Right. Is my voice a bit strange, or is it okay?
No, it's fine. It's perfect.
Right. Suddenly there's a big echo on it. Actually, to both you come in, Kate, I just wanted to actually ask two things. I mean, one is, I've been on debate night on the telly maybe 2 or 3 times, and every time there's a question about this sort of deteriorating behaviour in schools and so on. And on one occasion, I did venture the opinion that actually, because we're putting kids to school at 4 and 5, they're not learning the grounding that other schools and countries, rather, have quite evidently in their children, a sort of calmness and a centeredness that comes from not being thrust into formal situations before you're actually able to cope with it. I mean, am I just barking up the wrong tree here? Does anybody feel that there is that in it? That there's, to me, this is such an obvious connection and nobody raises it, which kind of, in political terms, it drives me bonkers. And the second one is, will somebody, because I'm seeing in the chat people saying, still, it's not very clear how we're going to get on to having 6 and 7 as a school starting age. Is there somebody here, one of the candidates, who can say, I know your Westminster candidates, this is a Holyrood issue, but how this will actually progress, or will we be here again in 4 or 5 years, or in 2026, having the same sort of circuitous argument? So anybody bold enough to answer either of those questions just as a close? You can put your wee hand up if you want to do it so I can see you're up for it. Not you, Kate, any of the candidates? No, not you, Sophie. Right, Laura.
So politics is the art of the possible, and sometimes it's a grindingly slow possible. So I think, as has been said by some of the others, there has been progress. I think there is a growing cross-party consensus now, and I think certainly enough cross-party consensus that there should be enough to get this through legislation, get it through the Scottish Parliament. So the next step for that, I don't think it's going to happen in this term of Parliament, because we've really only got a couple of years left and the legislative timetable is pretty full, but make sure all the parties have it in their manifesto at the next Scottish parliamentary elections, and make sure it's funded and costed. And if you get them all to do it, then when they get through the parliamentary process, there should be such a consensus that it's an easy win. You want to make it an easy win for politicians so that they can get that through. It'll sail through consultation, sail through Parliament, and yeah, the jobs are good. But it requires that consensus, and it will require funding. So think really carefully about what will this actually look like from a funding point of view.
Okay, Sue.
That's brilliant. I'm so grateful for you for saying it, and I do hope it happens. But in the meantime, there are large numbers of our children still being damaged badly by too formal education in P1. So could I just ask the SNP candidate, will they drop the P1 tests, which we have completely argued against ever since the beginning? Leslie, the reason you're quite right, children do not get time to learn to self-regulate. They get emotionally discombobulated if they are asked to do academic things before they're ready to do so. And that's what happens when you emphasize literacy and numeracy when children are only 4 or 5. So if we stopped testing them in literacy and numeracy, perhaps the local authorities would stop tracking them in literacy and numeracy from the age of 4, and the schools would be able to get on with play-based pedagogy. So are we going to drop those wretched P1 tests?
Annie? Annie, you're not hearing you. If you could unmute.
Sorry, we're not at the moment, and I'm not going to tell you that we are. I will go and have conversations with people about it. And that's, and I give you my word on that.
Okay, right. That's good to hear. That's grand, actually, because I think I know everybody else wants to come in, but just stop. You're just going to have to go away. You ask yous and have a conversation with each other and get it out of your system. Everybody else, can I just thank you for pitching up at a very busy time and putting your brains around this?
Leslie, can I just come in? Sorry, I know you're referring to the Askews, but it's Willie French here, and I just wanted to come on before you close, just to say, as chair of Upstart Scotland, I feel it's my responsibility to say thank you to you, Leslie, for chairing a really, really good and deep debate tonight. I put in the chat that I was a head teacher in primary education for 27 years. My plea is dead simple. It doesn't work at primary 1 and 2, and something has to change. And what I've heard from the politicians tonight, from the prospective politicians tonight, there are lots and lots of little things here and there, but no great big plan or no big commitment. Sue stole my thunder as a primary head teacher. To watch primary 1s being tested in literacy and numeracy is absurd to the point of being criminal. And the other thing I want to say is, we've got a fantastic guideline which is called Realising the Ambition. And all the politicians have to do is agree to make it legislation where every school has to apply it. And actually, we're just about in. We could just about say bingo. because that really would make a difference. So although people see this great big challenge, there are actually small things that we could do to really make this possible. But anyway, I just wanted to say that as chair. I want to thank Kate for organising tonight. I want to thank Sue for being the tremendous driver that she has initiated this campaign 9 years ago. And I want to thank you, Leslie, for giving up your time, and the people from the political parties tonight for giving up their time too. So thank you very much. From the Ask Yous.
Okay. I think that's the end. Right. Right, great. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think
Thank you very much.
us down. But I mean, the point as well, though, is I'm sure that's true for the candidates the same way as it's been for me. Every night's a learning night, you know, so that actually you pick up a lot from the questions that have been asked, the evidence that's being put forward, the detail about, you know, the UNCRC, for example, which I just didn't know about. I do now. So I hope that's true for all the candidates and it doesn't disappear like snow off a dike, as my Caithness mother would have said. So thanks very much to everybody and goodbye.